discussion this evening about visioning. And before we start, let me explain the chocolate. Well, you might remember that last time I was here, we were talking about capital planning, and I brought you some asphalt mix, which was, and there is some more of that tonight. But there's also chocolate-dipped key lime apples. There are peanut butter pucks. There are peppermints. There are little flat dark chocolate cacao nibs with salt on them. Yeah, those are good. And s'mores, which I think might all be gone. No, there's one left over here. And the thread throughout all of this, of course, is chocolate. But chocolate tastes different when it's combined with different sorts of things. And so it's differences and it's similarities. You have commonality in Evanston, which is the chocolate. And then you have things that give it sparkle of life, spritz it up a bit, and those are things like the apple, the marshmallow, the cacao nibs, the peanut butter, my favorite.
Peanut butter where?
Over there in the boxes, you should pass around. No hoarding. No hoarding.
We all get orders.
Okay. So, just as an underlying basis for our conversation tonight, just remember you've got common threads and you've got differences, and that's okay. And looking at a community's vision, it's not, as I've indicated up here, about strategic planning. Strategic plans are specific documents with tasks associated with them over a period of time. It's not goals and objectives, you've done that. And it's not a mission statement. It's an opportunity to explore what's meaningful about Evanston and what opportunities you see in the future. Because you can help shape this future if you identify the potential alternatives. And things are going to come at you rapidly. The pace of change, as much as a lot of people like to think they don't want change, can't avoid it. It's coming. And for the most part, it comes incrementally. Occasionally, it will come in a big jolt. But for the opportunities that are out there, if you think about them, if you talk about them, if you connect them relative to how you feel life is in Evanston, you can have some opportunities to look at okay, all right, sorry. You look at the possibilities and you can shape. To the extent possible, you can attempt to shape your future. It's also about capacity planning. A community like this has breadth and depth in its individuals, in its governance structure, in its private sector, its nonprofits, in its facilities above and below ground, in its natural amenities. So what capacities do you have? What can be expanded? What can be broadened? And what do they all mean about quality of life? So there are no homework assignments out of this tonight. There are no tasks to be performed. It's questions. It's an opportunity to talk among yourselves about what Evanston is now that makes it special. Why do you live here? Why do your neighbors live here? Why do people across the spectrum, age-wise, different cultures, different ethnicities, nationalities, want to come here, want to stay here? If they have to go, do they want to come back? What is it about this particular community that makes this place special? And in a very general sense, what are the 2 or 3 broad issues that tie you all together? And how will you want to shape those in the next 2 to 5 to 10 years? Going out 50 years is really unknowable in this day and age, but a couple of years ahead, look at, if you think back 2 years ago, what kind of technology were you using 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago? What are you using now? what's coming next, and how will you use that? So I'd like to ask the mayor to start off and speculate.
I think one of the broad issues that ties together is wanting to live in a diverse community and working to make that happen. And I think aldermen have been trying to do that in mayors for a long, long time.
Others?
Does everybody else get a chance, or is this all about?
I think Evanston more or less kind of want to meet other people, want to be out of their homes, they don't want to be secluded in their homes or their immediate areas. They want to get out, use our parks, meet other people, take walks, enjoy the cultural events, just come together in different forms, different ways. We have a lot of not-for-profits. We have all kind of ways in this community that people do work together and get to know each other. And it's not all business. A lot of it's simply social. I think that is at risk for some neighborhoods now because of violence, and that's something we need to make sure we maintain and even improve.
I think many people come because of our progressiveness in Evanston. I don't want to say liberal, but I think that progressive is a way of describing not just the local politics, but the overall attitude toward most people here. Progressiveness and tolerance.
This is an essay answer. We talked today, and I just was giving some thought to the concept. And later in the day, I was having a conversation with my oldest son, who's thinking about going to college, and having the conversation with him about what he wants out of a university, what he wants out of a college. And it just struck me that really there are a lot of parallels there, because in some ways Evanston's it's like a big college. It has lots of different aspects to it and opportunities to it. And I think a lot of times when we talk about diversity, we inadvertently tend to limit ourselves to a couple of features, racial diversity and socioeconomic diversity. But really, I think what Evanston has goes beyond that. It has diversity of opportunity. We have arts, we have sports, we have education, we have anything that you would want to try, much like a college, because it's not just your major. There's something for everybody, and there's opportunities to try other things. And that broad range of opportunity and the opportunity to explore diversity in so many different ways, I think, is what makes it really unique. Other places might have the same socioeconomic makeup or same racial breakdown, but I don't think other places have the same diversity as far as the opportunities are concerned.
How do you know that? How do you know that other places don't have similar attributes?
I'm sure a lot do. I don't think we're completely unique. When I was talking to Jean today, I fell in love with Evanston High School. I just lived in Buffalo Road, went to other towns, and just really liked it. I went to Lawrence, and I found a lot of similarities in that town. I think Lawrence is a great town. There are lots of great towns around. But for me, they kind of shared that broad spectrum, and that's what appeals to me. And it might not appeal to everybody, but from my own perspective, that's one of the things that I found interesting and exciting.
Similar to Don's comments, specifically the school system here. In my ward, I meet a lot of young families that moved from Chicago, and one of the comments that I hear them say is because of the school system. And I think in Evanston, as it compares to the city, there really isn't a bad school. I mean, the resources, the balance of diversity, the opportunities the kids have, the quality teachers, the diversity of arts and sports, and after-school programs is, I think, one of the the better qualities of our town. And I'm just talking right now about District 65, and then of course when you get to the high school, I think similar to what Don says, I think ETHS does an extraordinary job about preparing kids academically and also socially. And I think if you successfully navigate yourself through Evanston Township, it really prepares any student to walk through any door in the future.
Others?
I think I'm kind of the same, is that two kids through the high school, growing up in Evanston, the years since they were born. I think they'll be back, and it's because of this progressive sensibility. I mean, the question is what would bring our children back?
Yeah.
And the Midwestern pragmatism and the sense of having been here, knowing that you can walk in any door, that you can talk to almost anybody in the world because of you've been grounded in experiences here.
So what are you doing today that you feel will support some of these kinds of concepts in the next 2, 5, 10 years? What are you working on today? Where do you see Evanston going in maintaining this? And is there anything that you want expanded on this list?
Well, I think one kind of common thread in all this is creating opportunity for others, for ourselves, and through either the school educational system or stuff that the city does. It's about creating opportunity.
Well, I don't think you can create opportunity or maintain a diverse community without worrying constantly about not taxing so much that you drive people out of town. So, from my point of view, I'm continually trying to figure out how to expand economic opportunity for the city, and working on selling water, working on economic development, and I think you all are too. I think if we don't do those things, we can't maintain the community that we have. And pension reform, that's the other thing.
And what we've been talking about is either creating or preserving that opportunity to stay in as a priority, as a vision for how people live well here.
We all have lofty visions, money for the vision.
I think an issue of concern that I spoke with you about this earlier, that other friends of mine and I have had is, will our children be able to return? Will they be able to afford to live here? If this is the place that they think of as home, and that's something that I think about. Not just housing, but economic life. I mean, will there be economic life, not just in Evanston, but in the Chicago area, that will have jobs that my children and my friends' children and the whole community children will be able to come back to, that they can choose to come back to. And that's not a 2 to 5 year.
Well, for some people, yeah, for some it is.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Someone who's about to be a senior in college, yeah. So, I don't think I'm going to see it.
And a lot of communities are also facing the aging in place issue and what happens to people who want to continue to live here and not want to go somewhere else at the end of their lives when all of their relationships are here. And does this community accommodate that?
I believe we have created a ecosystem here that many communities strive for. I know a lot of times people say we're in mini Chicago, but it's really that we do have a variety of aging in place. We also have parks, as well as the lakefront, as well as an intellectual mecca here as well. So it really is a fully well-rounded ecosystem. We have control of our utilities in many ways. We do have a vibrant business community, so we are doing economic opportunities. We have intellectual curiosity. So I think that's something that many other suburbs would envy, because we do have that diversity. And part of the reason why during the economic downturn, where obviously we were all hit by that, we were able to maintain in a way that many other communities maybe couldn't, because we did have that diversity of employment as well as housing, as well as we had not-for-profits as well as businesses to maintain our infrastructure here. So I think that that's extremely important. Why people, when you were talking about, you were talking to your son about going away to school, what I hear from a lot of Evanstonians is they want to find a college experience like here. They go out and they visit colleges. They're like, we're trying to replicate the Northwestern Evanston piece somewhere else, and it's really challenging to find. You hear it over and over again. So I think it's where we do have an interesting ecosystem in our 8 square miles.
I think it's small enough to have that homey feel, but yet still be able to be close enough to Chicago to have the urban feel as well. So I think that's one of the attractions. It's very difficult to replicate anywhere.
So one of the things that Wally and the mayor and I talked about yesterday was, Evanston's been around 150 years and as an incorporated city, and some of the things that I think laid the foundation for what Colleen described as a unique ecosystem here are truly unique to Evanston, and that is a couple of things. Some of the best things that I think Evanston has going for it can continue to be built upon, but they include things like that you don't have physical barriers within the city of Evanston. There are no blockades between neighborhoods, no railroad tracks. You live on that side of the tracks, we live on this side of the tracks. You do, okay.
The line goes all the way to New York from one end to the other.
Well, I have to go take a look at that, but you don't have many of them. You don't have many of them. So you have, viaducts, grade separations, and so you can really walk from one side of Evanston to another, and north to south and east to west.
But see, we do have 2 railroads that go right through town, north to south, dividing the city.
Okay.
I think what she means, though,
That's not 994.
Well, we were talking about this yesterday. Other communities around us, Metro, the UP tracks are at grade. And so there are issues with traffic, there's issues with physical collisions, and we're blessed. I mean, how many hundreds of years ago we built the L and this moments of the L and the UP tracks elevated here?
About 100 years ago.
About 100 years ago. I mean, communities are struggling, trying to spend tens of millions of dollars at each grade crossing.
I'm not complaining about it, but the fact is the yellow line does divide neighborhoods. It's in a ravine. It's not a break. It's a ravine for most of the trip through my ward. And then it goes up. But it's a divider. It's definitely a divider.
What's the effect?
I believe that I think it's, I think there is, because the communities are so old, the neighborhoods are old, some people have just stayed in place, but I believe you would find the housing stock is more expensive on the north side of the train tracks.
Another factor is you've been doing transit-oriented development before it became trendy.
Well, we were doing it since 1920.
And
for a lot of communities, that's an angst-producing thing, but it's part of your environment here, and you continue to do it. The other thing that's unique about Evanston is your multimodality. You have lots of ways to get around in this community, and it's a small community. It's compact. It's relatively flat, so if you are physically mobile, it's easy to get around, to walk and bike, and you're looking at amenities and changes to that, and that's part of your strategy moving forward for the next 2 to 10 years. But you have the features in place, you have the assets in place with your transit system, your bus system, the pathways you're creating, the sidewalks and connections, and that ability to transport and to allow people to age in place and still move around, for children to be able to get to school, have safe paths of travel in a community. Those are important amenities that someone thought about and is still thinking about in this community, how to make that all better, how to knit it together so it's easier for people to communicate, to get around, to be neighborly, to share interests and information. You also have a really nice downtown. Plus you have other retail and commercial areas scattered throughout your communities, closer to your neighborhood. So if people don't want to go downtown to have a bite to eat in the early evening on a nice summer night, they can find a restaurant nearby. And those are lovely amenities to have within walking distance biking. Plus you've got the vibrant downtown. And one of the other things that I think is we talked about last time is a great amenity and asset for the city of Evanston is your 311 system. I think you have made very, very good use of that, and I think that you'll find that to be a very powerful tool in the years to come to figure out what people want and what they're willing to talk with you about, tell you about, issue by issue, and perhaps even in a broader sense. So if you want to change conversations in your community about looking at the opportunities going forward, how can you use that information? How can you build upon the foundation that you've already created to go down some interesting paths here? So what are your opportunities that you have this kind of stuff? People who lived here in the past helped design, create it. What would you like to see continue about that? I know this is scary stuff and you're overloaded on chocolate, so. These are hard discussions to have because you're very practical people. You work on your problems and issues in your ward, you answer questions, you tackle the things that come up on a daily basis. Having these kinds of conversations isn't easy, but you need to hear from each other about why Evanston is the way it is and what you want it to be.
I think I just had trouble making the leap from the practical nuts and bolts to a higher level discussion that, frankly, I don't have the luxury of ever engaging in.
We have a lot of work to do in aging in place. I mean, that's a tremendous opportunity for us, but it's also, we had all sorts of seniors taking photos of things they liked in town that helped them, and they were excited to do it. But I think we've got a ways to go before we can say we've solved that one.
And I believe it's also important to not think of things in a siloed fashion. So I think we talk about violence in the community, we talk about aging in place, and we talk about inclusionary housing. We talk about all these pieces as pieces and not as a comprehensive look at the community. And I believe that's in many times where we fall down in discussions and in particular with the community, when the community comes out to citizen comment and you have the special interest groups or factions, that we focus on that one particular problem and not articulate what it is comprehensively. If you do this, then it pulls this lever. So the narrative of explaining how we have to think about all of the pieces and how they fit together, not in a piecemeal fashion. And very rarely do we have the opportunity to do that. So you don't, even, when we're discussing, last night was inclusionary zoning or it was environmental issues or whatever, we just tackle that piece and really doing a better job of saying the vision for the community, but we spend money here, this is what's going to happen, something else needs to be taken away, and it's not, we can't do everything. And again, speaking about that, I don't think we do that enough. And it's very important because people say you don't care about X, Y, or Z, and particularly during budget season, I think this comes up a lot, that we have to say, well, yes, we do care about this, but we also have to make sure that our roads are in good shape, and we're doing our sewers, and we're doing, parks programs. I don't know how to do that exactly, but we need to spend more time articulating that we are comprehensive and that we're thinking bigger picture.
Well, it's a challenge that most of the communities around us aren't doing. You've all said it's a community value to look at the big picture, and we have, over time in Evanston, tried to do that. In bad budget times, we've constricted back. We have better budget times. The idea that we're now the general assistance provider, so that puts us squarely in the middle of taking care of people's basic needs through that. And the staff is looking, from a human services perspective, really 4 areas. One is, from 0 to about 15, and what are we doing to, be supportive largely of efforts that we don't get involved in. We do daycare, but those efforts are taken care of by others. We're very much into the sort of 15 to 25 area, both on the recreation side and then the youth and young adult division. Then we have the whole group of adults who are at risk from, let's say, 18 to 55, and then we have the seniors 55 and above. So I asked the staff to come together, people who touch all those areas, and they're getting ready to come back to council in September to talk about things, because the senior folks say we don't have enough resources. The youth and young adult folks say we need more resources to go out and do the good work that we're doing. The general assistance folks are saying, okay, we've got this money, but how do we connect it with the housing piece? And how much more should we be doing? And all this costs money. And Marty's got dollar amounts for pensions, and we're going to have to put more money into pensions. And that's money.
He's got money somewhere.
No, we don't. And the challenge is, what button can we push? What limited resource do we have? Or what do we stop doing? What do we cut? After all the cuts, we've cut 100 positions and $10 million over the course of, period of what, Marty, 4 or 5 years, 3, 4 years. And I've asked the staff to cut some more because we got to fund the very things that you're all concerned about, rightfully so. But what and where and how?
When do we start thinking outside of the box and do things differently? Because you're absolutely right. We certainly have to look at all those areas, and I'd like to be breakdown of the age groups. But as when we think about those, we begin to think about how do we partner with those in our community already to make sure that those are done, so that it just doesn't fall just on the city, because it's not. The city can't do it all. But in partnership, we may be able to provide those. And so that's the kind of thinking that I think we have to move toward. And we have to look at changes, and we have to look at, I think the mayor started out by talking about economic broadening that, but we have to broaden our tax base. So we're going to have to think about how do we do that? How can we use resources that we have to make that broader? Because people, my residents talk about no more taxes, please don't raise my tax bill, as if we raise it. People don't even get that. But,
we have one resource, our lake, and we're going to have to think about how do we use that? How do we begin to use that to help do some of that? So that's kind of out of the box thinking that I'm talking about that we may have to, well, that I hope we will move toward. And it's changed, and people don't necessarily want to talk about it or like it. But I think that if we're talking about 5-10 years, that we better start to think like that.
And then again, we are the kind of community, though, that isn't looking to put the brakes on everything. That status quo is not always good. It's not presumed that status quo is good. So
in some areas.
Right, so it is possible to think outside the box, bring the community along with us.
Well, we also are doing some things that will help the youth and young adult group. I mean, Oakton, we can talk to Oakton a lot, and they have come and taught some classes in town, and I think they will come and teach more. So we're getting some workforce development. We're getting some help from the high school with workforce development that they never did before. So
right.
It's not all the city. It's encouraging some of the other
partners, those kind of partnerships that want to
point out where we're trying.
Absolutely. But that's one area. There are other areas that you could as well.
When you cross all of this with the quality of life here in Evanston, how does it all interconnect? How do you make it connect? And the money is one part of it, and you are wrestling well with the money monster.
I've conned you well.
No, it's not easy, and it's not going to get easier. But if you cross your desires, your ability to look at comprehensively at what you're doing and what you could stop doing, what you could change about what you do, what the basics are that you need to maintain, and how does that all tie to your quality of life?
I can give you a vision. You want a vision?
Yeah, I want a vision.
Okay, my vision is that a child graduating from ETHS who's not going on to college will have the same vast array of opportunities before them that the college student does. We will have all sorts of career opportunities available to them.
Does that sound like a good vision to the rest of you?
But how much is the national government responsible for that?
Right.
And how much money do we put toward making that happen?
A little. And we get the other groups who need to be joining in to join in.
Because we already try to keep the community safe. And I think that's a big deposit. Right.
Keeping it safe is to provide opportunities for all youth, not just for some.
But, a few years ago, we had one person doing what's now the youth and young adult. And that individual, went to meetings and talked. And all of you said that was not perhaps the most effective use of that resource. And now we have, 2 full-time and 4 part-time people going out and doing extremely important work. But there's cost to that. There's a financial cost. But this organization here before, had 1 salary. Now we have, 3.5 FTE to that, which is great and important. But what are we not doing? Or are we raising taxes in order to pay for that? Or are we just letting the rise in the economy? So we're just investing new resources to that. So that's my question for all of you, is that when there's new resources, I have staff saying, okay, well, we all want to make sure we're all paid well. And then we've got this pension monster on our back, and we've got to continue to put money toward that. And then you've got your capital backlog, you've got your vehicles that need to replace. Not a lot of that has anything to do with all the important things we're talking about. We still have to pay for it.
Yes, still have to pay for it. And you can only be responsible for that which you have control over. And unfortunately, you do not have primary control over your education system. But you have a great interest in it, and the people who come to your meetings tie those activities with the other things that you're doing? And are there ways to influence education so you don't have to spend your money if your key responsibilities are safety and your underlying infrastructure and your transportation system and delivering your basic services, then how can you have the conversations with the educational institutions in your community and the other groups that provide auxiliary services to make sure that they're doing their job? It's not, you don't have to do everything. I know it often feels
Well, I think, Jean, first we could offer your services to the two districts and then proceed from there to Northwestern and the two hospitals, and have them, because we can't be the only ones visioning on this. And I think for a vision that I would have over the next sort of short-term horizon, which I'm thinking 5 to 7 years, would be that we somehow break down some of our boundaries between our school districts, the natural ones that, we all have our purpose and our jurisdiction and our mission, but if we could open it up more, as we are all saying, that so that we all recognize that we all have the same purpose and vision, is to make Evanston a better place to live. So to the degree to which we can reach out to those other large influential organizations in our community and say, what can we do more jointly? And I think the Cradle to Career program is doing that somewhat, but I think that not necessarily, but I think that there are more things that can be done. So to have a better communication system between and some joint goals between the school districts, where bridges are being built more towards the university, but even more, and the two hospitals, who are our second and third largest employers. Because their mission is wellness, and our mission is community wellness. So our missions are the same.
Some kind of more meaningful partnerships.
Yeah, thank you.
There's a vision for.
That should have been my topics then.
Yes.
And I still like that we should
I
suggest
like
Jean to
everything
them
you said.
too. Right, yeah. That may be my best idea. Could we have your card?
When you hear each other talk about things like this, what does it trigger for you in the 2 to 5 year range about what you know now and what you think you see coming? What are those possibilities and that could lay some groundwork for some of these kinds of discussions with the hospitals, the schools, others in the community? It's okay to say that you can't do everything, and that you have set priorities, and these are the things that you plan on working on. You set those goals and objectives. They're part of your budget process, and you have limited resources. So how can you engage these conversations among yourselves? What do you want to accomplish for Evanston in the next 2 to 5 years? And then how do you want to engage these other entities? And talking about Evanston as a whole thing, you're not in silos. You are interconnected. You have these interconnecting networks, and you're a complex microorganism. And you've got good material to work with. So how are you going to make the best use of that?
Well, I'm going to decrease the amount we spend on pensions, not in any way impacting the current pension holders' money that they receive. There are several things that we can do that don't impact current pension money, and hopefully we're going to sell water to several other communities very soon, because they would be very wise to buy from us. They will save a lot of money.
don't write that like that.
Hopefully Northwest.
Not the preschool vendors.
Yeah.
Decrease
Pension costs.
Pension costs.
Pension costs.
Good catch, guys.
Yeah, you would have heard about that.
And we're hoping,
Going to be heard.
Yeah, sure.
we're hoping to keep Northwestern universities. They incubate a lot of businesses on campus, and we're hoping to keep the businesses that they incubate on campus in town to help us with economic development. So that's my plan.
Well, and a lot of that was talking about creating new revenue streams or decreasing future costs. So what
I'm not good at decreasing costs.
Well, if you can control future pension costs, hopefully over time.
Well, that one, yeah.
But if, say, you did free up some additional revenue came to the city, or your costs did decrease, what would you do with that money?
Well, I think Colleen touched on it. We have infrastructure needs, and we've got a lot of deferred. It's beyond the point of maintenance, but before. If we can utilize these strategic partnerships, cradle to career, or any of the other opportunities that are out there, if we can take some things off of our plates, that'll enable us to get the streets paved, fix the water mains, and put ourselves in a position where we're not going to have a whole bunch of broken water mains every winter. But infrastructure to me is it's approaching a desperate need, so I'd like to get ahead of it as much as possible.
Me too.
So one of the possibilities is that you can look at your potential new revenue sources or decreased costs and as an asset to allocate toward your priorities. And it's a struggle to do this, but resist new fun things. Can you do that? Do you want to do that?
Well, the interesting is also leveraging that extra money, leveraging your resources to build new resources. And I think that's in many ways what we do on the infrastructure piece. If we get ahead of it, it will cost us less long term. But also on the economic development front, if we're willing to spend money on X, what will that ROI be for us? And thinking about that 2, 5, 10 years out. A good example of that is Howard Street. There was a lot of risk of putting money, so we're going to take the money and spend it, but it's growing. And so 5 years from now, what will that be for us? So leveraging our dollars versus just spending them, but really investing them in a way that will help us longer term. And just economic development is one piece of it, but I think also infrastructure, the water piece, again, that's investing our dollars in a way versus just spending our dollars.
Well, the Howard Street work impacts safety and violence because you put more eyes on the street. It's a good thing.
Right, but it's all some friction.
So does that make sense? Can it be a combination? You don't have to, one of the best things about looking out into the future is it's not an either-or proposition. It's more like an and, both, any option. And you don't always have to be the ones to provide all the solutions either. So are there ways that you can have conversations around like a leveraging issue or an infrastructure issue among yourselves and potentially beyond, and others that have partnership? But I think you, as council members, as aldermen, need to have these conversations among yourselves about how you're going to want to talk about this with your community.
when the time comes. And so how do you go about doing that? How do you have, this is the start of it, but how do you have these kinds of conversations? If out of this came, not tonight, but at some point in time, you identified some key things that you want to flesh out more, take the concept and vet it. You want to kind of curate the concept. So leveraging your assets, for instance. What does that mean to each one of you? Can you deconstruct it? Can you put it back together again? Can you agree upon a common explanation? So when people say, when you say you're leveraging your assets at a council meeting, you can then explain to your constituents what it is you mean by that and what are all the elements you considered about it. Are those kinds of conversations possible? Is it easier to do it around one thing or one concept at a time?
I think having those kinds of conversations very difficult. And one of the reasons is because of the structure in which we have conversations, how we do our business. There are many, many meetings that we have where we do not deal with one piece of city business until 10 o'clock at night. Because we have all sorts of presentations, we have all sorts of citizen comment. The pre-agenda item meeting goes on and on and on. And by the time we get to the city business, some of us are frustrated and just want to get it over with. Others are too tired. Others are hungry. Others have to go to the bathroom. I mean, there's all sorts of things going on where people are just not of the right frame of mind to conduct city business. And it happens a lot lately. For example, we had, 8 pages of agenda items last night. And, some very serious items on that agenda, many of which did not get discussed, should have been discussed. So, we have the 2 meetings, the 2 committee meetings prior to the council meeting. A little opportunity there to have a little better discussion, but not a whole lot. And I get very frustrated with the process these days. Very frustrated.
It seems sometimes we don't have the luxury of having those policy discussions with the community. That it's
with each other. I mean, I have to have them with each other first.
With the community, that either there's no time or easy place for these conversations to happen, or maybe just no interest. I don't know if we could engage the community in larger policy discussions about how one does economic development, what are the tools, how we deploy them, what's a reasonable return on our investment, things like that. It seems as if for all of us, we're all so busy, time is short, that kind of conversation is kind of the bonus that we never get to. And maybe it should precede a lot of the actual business of the city. But
I think it's controlling. I think we do a good job of being transparent, and our marketing team talks about what we're doing on issues. But I'm not sure that we do a good job of controlling our narrative on why we're doing it and why we're setting the policy agenda. And many times we let people at citizen comment control our narrative and we respond to the narrative versus getting in front of the narrative. We let the press define our narrative and we're responding to our narrative. And so having that policy discussion and getting that policy why we're doing, so versus an economic development, we voted on X, Y, and Z and we're going to give money to whatever. So the facts are reported out, but not the story, not the narrative behind it. And that's, I think, something we can do to get in front of that, to explain ourselves better, to look at that holistic approach. But that has to come, I think, from
the city manager, I was like, none of us are going to do our own narrative. But I know many times we'll get an email about something, and it's not a yes or no answer. It's you have to really go to to explain why you did this or why we're doing that, and it has so many pieces to it. I think it'd be helpful to have more of a joint narrative that's coming out from the city. Does that, am I making sense?
Do people are interested, or do they just want to know?
I think they're interested. I think they're very interested.
I mean, because I know we love the work we do, and we're in deep on it, can we assume that people are interested in knowing?
Yeah, I
32,000 people get the e-news. They have an ability to unsubscribe every week.
And the e-news is great, but it talks about specific items. It doesn't talk about thought process.
But you have to come to the meeting.
They I think you're right in some ways. I think you're right, but I think in the sense that I think the 32,000 people who are reading all of the new material we have pushing out there, they're getting the concept. It isn't, but when they read all of the pieces together, they see what we're doing. And so I think that there is much more sense of the city has a purpose and that we have particular goals that we're working towards and than there used to be. And I think people are, whenever I get asked a question about, now what's going on or how about this or what about that, instantly it just blooms up into more questions and more questions. Somebody wants to know about this and what about that? And so I think for the most part people are very interested because it's why people live in Evanston. They don't view their government as this separate thing that happens in some vague village hall somewhere, but it's something that they interact with all the time. But I was thinking though, that I agree with you on terms of pushing out more of a narrative, but I think we're doing that much more than we have in the past. And I do think that the
mayor's message.
Right, the mayor's message, absolutely.
So how much did we hear about the city council? Do they really have time to talk about this or that when we've got a gun violence issue? And of course we do, because our agendas are long and rich but for the mayor then to push the reset button on the narrative on gun violence and what the city is doing, and yes, it's got our full attention, but we can pay attention to all kinds of things at the same time.
And I do think the special meeting, I was going to say, the special meeting where we had the presentation on the water sales, I mean, that may seem really dry, which is a terrible It's the chocolate. But, if you're enough of a policy wonk or something like that, and we have the viewers out there who are listening to that. I mean, that's the big long range, here's the big vision, here's our resource, it's the lake, and here are these other communities who, they need us, and here's what we're doing, and here's the thought process behind it, and here are the various ways in which we can make this water more attractive to them. I thought that was an excellent presentation in terms of, a very, very big, significant issue that really could make a huge difference to us here in Evanston. So I agree. And that was a place where, Dave Stoneback got out there and he set the narrative of what are we trying to do? Here's what we're trying to do, and here's why, and this is why it makes sense, and this is why we need just these communities to come to their senses.
I do think even the most attentive and devoted person in the community that watches council is still going to miss. There are going to be gaps. Life is that way. And there's even gaps in some of the things I'm focused on. But I think that, it always surprises me, but shouldn't, that whenever we make a purchase on Howard Street, there seems to be like a big surprise. And I don't know that we're repeating that there is a very good plan and some accomplishments there that we are trying to even build upon. And maybe that needs repeating, even though we know it and we assume people know it. I'm not sure that people really have that in the back of their heads to understand why we purchased another building on Howard Street.
Although Ann does an excellent job
at
meetings.
I never shut up about it.
Here's what it used to be, this is why it's important, and here's our vision, and here are the steps we've taken.
But that's what people watch. There are people who watch our meetings are pretty well formed, but I think if you're not, if you're just picking up your news from... If you pick up your news from the media, I don't know that you're going to get that comprehensive view every time, so...
Now people translate Howard Street to other places.
We have a restaurant and a cocktail lounge that are failing, so, if you read the press, that's what you pick. That's what you pick.
But maybe that's also part when those buildings are going to be purchased, or we're doing something of having a preamble to those things of this is why this is part of the piece of the puzzle to what we're doing on Howard. I almost think you can't over communicate it.
But that was done, and I will tell you, I think except for a few people in this town, there has been extraordinary acceptance for what's been done on Howard Street. In fact, people are affording all sorts of credit to me where credit is not due. I just had an idea, but I continually say, our staff, our city manager are driving these efforts, and it's all successful. It's all good. And I disagree that there is a negativity about Howard Street among the general public of our efforts. I do think there are a few people who get extraordinary press time who hate the idea. And there's nothing I can do about that.
I just think people are curious. People ask me if there's a plan, and I'm surprised.
You got my number.
Okay. But I think the information is out there, but are we getting it out there enough? Or is the media helping us in that way? And I don't think it's necessarily that they think there's a problem as much as they just would like to be reminded, if they did want to know, that there is a comprehensive
There's a vision. Definitely a vision, and it's a 2-5-year vision. And hopefully everybody will Make It Better this month, because 2 of the #1 businesses are on Howard Street. Who would have thought?
Not only that there's a vision, but that it's a methodology.
It is.
That other communities use purchasing property and controlling development as an economic development tool, and that this is a common and almost best practice in many places. So the detractors are not about Howard Street. I think the detractors are about the city playing a role in supporting development anywhere through economic development tools. And so maybe there's an educational thing that we can do to bring people up to speed on, planning theory and economic development, and what our role is and what we can do and what we can't do.
And I just read a letter that I think several of us have received, where somebody who I have great respect for said, I absolutely oppose any city support, financial support, for any for-profit business. And I'm thinking that is very short-sighted. And so that's out there. But this is important because the city is on a track for economic development.
I understand.
Not just how it's
Dawn has been waiting to speak.
No, it's partially an observation, but I recently heard one of our state senators say this, so I can't take total credit for it. But the comment was that the most dangerous threat to democracy is an uninformed electorate. And what we have are people who make decisions based on, they're going to vote for governor based on the TV commercials, or they're going to send us an email based on the headline in a local press. And even the local press will have, there'll be an article, and there'll be a link to the section in the packet, and then there'll be a comment at the bottom that is completely apparent that the person didn't read the article, they read the headline, and you can't force people to do that. So I think that we are actually doing an exceptional job. I think our local press does, get issues out there in the forefront and gets them out there for conversation. But it's some more work for us. We have to respond to these things and respond to questions. But the people who really care and want to understand, I think, are the ones who will reach out to us. And if they feel like they don't get the information that they need from those sources, so.
You have a really great foundation for claiming the narrative on the city's behalf and on your citizens' behalf with your e-newsletter and the way that you all communicate and your use of technology and the city's use of technology, and it's 311. Governments are not very good at marketing themselves. At all levels, that's just not something that governments do well. You do it better than most, and that controlling the narrative and making sure that to the best extent possible that the information is out there, it's accurate, it's available, that there are links if people do have questions. That's almost as much as you can do. I want to go back to one other question, which goes back to your council meeting. Yes.
The finale of my comment. I guess one thing, though, to remember, and this is what my point ultimately was, is that people are busy. They don't have time to read the packets, and that's kind of what they're paying us for. So there's a lot of trust. I mean, the vast majority of the public trust that we're not going to go out there and do something stupid. And every once in a while, somebody will see something and they'll think like, oh my God, asleep at the wheel. But it's important to remember that we are, given this trust. So, if somebody feels like we've gone against that, that's when we have to try to explain our actions.
And that's a hard hole to dig out of once the public feels like they can't trust you to do the right thing. And so, one question about your structure. How much could you change the structure of your meetings? Do you want to change the structure of your meetings so that you find a different way to have the conversations? You may be stuck in what state law requires or something like that, but can you change your structure, and do you want to change your structure?
I think once our committee meetings get going, great information is shared by staff and with one another. Our council meetings are fine. It's just that we don't get to them. We developed a process now of having interim council meetings, like a meeting sometimes on the third and fifth Monday. But that doesn't seem to be enough for all the extra things that we do. If we were just meeting as committees and a council, it would be fabulous. But we have to have citizen comment, and then we have awards, and then we have not necessarily special order of business, but presentations. And the meeting doesn't start until late. Not all the time. I mean, we've had a couple of meetings where we're out at 9 o'clock. It's amazing. But those are meetings where, there's nothing going on. So,
I think Delores should run them because she got the record for getting everybody out.
But I'm not opposed to this comment, but it's a fact of life. Our meetings don't start until too late.
Yeah, and I think that the citizen comment piece should be tweaked in some ways. I think particularly when there's hot button issues that many times people show up and they're not completely informed, or they have a piece of the puzzle, and then they get up and you have many people come and talk and make comment. And then we get to the meeting where we have a discussion, and many of the comments they made aren't informed, aren't relevant to really what's happening. So it's almost like we're doing a disservice, as if maybe we can structure in a way of giving the information before citizen comment starts about, okay, this is what's really being talked about versus what they just heard in the press, or what a headline, or they got an email from whatever special interest, to make it actually more of a productive conversation. Again, I don't have a vision for what exactly that would look like, but there's got to be a better way when people come that we're sharing information and getting feedback or comment that's relevant, versus before we even start talking, they're upset about something or just misinformed. And again, I think it goes back to your comment that is the scary
pessimistic. If you've got 5 people like that at every meeting and you spend 10 minutes with each of them explaining it to them, you've spent a lot more time than just listening to them in an average. And the thing is that the information is there ahead of time. Everybody has access to the same packet that we get. The information is available, they're just choosing not to look at it.
But I agree, because someone else is taking what's in the packet and creating our narrative and emailing it out to get people to come. So not necessarily that they're receiving facts about what is happening. They're receiving a one-sided story of what's happening. So I think in many cases it's a waste of the citizens' time if they're not fully informed when they're coming up to talk to us. It's really more of a dialogue, getting more information before they're coming and saying something. It's like, okay, this is really what's happening. Who wants to speak to this? Versus everyone just getting up and talking without really, there's not exactly a dialogue at it. And then they get up and talk, and they're saying things that are completely wrong. And then that's going out into the public. That's not right information. So in some ways we have a responsibility, and we don't respond as part of our, people can say whatever that's completely wrong, and we don't respond to say that's not actually accurate, and then it just perpetuates But I think these days we much more than we used to. I mean, it used to be there was such a really strong sense that people could get up and say whatever was on their mind, whether it was completely wrong or not, and that we never, ever spoke to it. But I think now the mayor does call on Wally a number of times to correct things, much more than in the past. And, having been on the council when there was no time limit on citizen comment. No, there was no time limit. The first 4 years I was on the council, and we frequently didn't start the regular meeting till after 11. So there is now this time period, and to some extent, I think it's going to be messy. It just is always going to be messy. I mean, that's not a pessimistic view, but I think it's really hard for people to be as well informed as we are on this. But still, if you look at what people say over time, there's always something useful that comes through. Sometimes you have to sift through a lot of things, and some of it is, the whole point is for them to be able to tell us they're unhappy about something, that there's another way to look at it, or, how many times have people raised completely new issues to us? And, because we have the citizen comment forum. They come in and say, this is going on, and they get our citizen comment more useful.
Well, I think, though, that for me anyway, I think that we have to encourage people more and more to use the subcommittees. And I say that because we can give them more time in the committee to state what they want to state. Now, they're still going to come to the council and complain or make their views, because people want other folk to hear how they feel about certain situations. Nothing we can do about that. But we can have a chance to correct or at least give them our views in the committee meetings. And so to me, that's really the value of the subcommittees. And we have to spend more time doing that. So I'm much more lenient, in terms of letting people speak, not maybe as long as they want to speak, but giving them a little bit more time and having some dialogue so that we can understand where they're coming from, ask questions, give them, no, that's not correct. This is,
But I think what's missing here is there are people who come to speak for a lot of different reasons. Some just want to be heard, some just want the microphone, some want to be advocates and influence our decision or our discussion. But what's also missing for them is they don't know what is effective advocacy. So if there are ways to help inform and educate the people who come to advocate what is effective and what is not, and the mayor's starting in on if you have 5 people saying the same thing, designate one. Being informed makes you a much better and a much more effective advocate than being ill-informed, because we know a lot, and we know when you don't know a lot. So help us,
we can't train them. I mean, no matter what, we can't train them. I mean,
we can suggest.
Oh, absolutely.
Suggest.
Jane, I'm really sorry I started this, because I think we're getting away from the vision. So maybe we could have this conversation in the rules.
But I think
about citizen comment so much or presentation as time to have the conversation among council members. And so anyway.
Well, and part of it is your structure, the structure that you have to work within. And what about that can you change if you want to perhaps try some different ways of helping the community become smarter about what they comment on, or starting your meetings earlier so that you're awake during the substantive portions. And not meaning to be facetious, because I watched you last night, you were all awake, and you did a great job. But, that can be part of your strategy planning too, because it can't be a wonderful thing for the citizens to have a substantive discussion at 11 o'clock at night either. And you're informed and you're tired, you just want to get it over with sometimes. That's understandable. So is there a different structure that might work for you and for the community going forward? And I don't know
assign this to our rules committee. We have a committee where we discuss this kind of thing.
We can assign it in, but I don't want to let this discussion go without saying one thing that I think all of us believe, but that hasn't been said sufficiently, which is that citizen comment is tremendously important. And yes, some citizens are not as informed as they need to be about a specific issue to be effective advocates, but there are a lot of citizens who are know more than we do about an issue that impacts their neighborhood, and it's tremendously important to have them come.
Absolutely. But the council has looked, you already separate agenda items versus non-agenda items.
We don't need to have people speak twice.
And there are members of the community who I think take advantage of the non-agenda item portion. That with the routes you had talked about, perhaps moving that to the end of the meeting. So there are options, but you have talked about them and rejected them.
Yeah, we have.
So we've talked about the consent calendar, the need to read the consent calendar, and you all have said that's community value in Evanston to read the consent calendar out loud. I would challenge you to find another government agency anywhere in the world that reads this consent calendar, but you have said over and over that that's a community value in Evanston.
It was said it's a transparent issue because people don't read our packet. That way they know, I heard you're going to pave a alley or something. That's how they hear it.
And I'm no longer going to advocate to change it. But you also recognize that you have committee meetings that last for 3 hours prior to the reading of the consent calendar where you've largely talked about it. So I think that's just
But the consent calendar, I know you're against that, but it takes about 10 minutes. So it's not really dragging out the council meeting. Not dragging it out.
And I think it's where you place it. I tried twice and I've given up. So.
And we can include that in the conversation.
Yes.
We could do a pilot program for 6 months and see what happens.
Could we move on? I was very excited about this meeting, but now we've often consent agenda and citizen comment, which I never intended. Well, tell us what excited you about wanting to have this meeting? The vision. The vision and mission. Okay, and so what aspects of that do you want to share with this group? We started the meeting out about people, and we all talked about this, about people who grew up here and then they leave, Well, I came here late in life, and, in high school, and left. But I did come back, and I had not a good time at Evanston High School. I didn't like the high school. They didn't like me. And it's true. But I came back because the community was so vibrant. And also, like you said, the grade schools. I wanted my children to be in these schools. So that's why I came back. And so I was here, as Delores was here, when we had a vibrant downtown. We had like 6 department stores and 3 theaters. We had just everything you could ever want. We had all the stores that were in the loop. And then it all fell apart. And you could shoot a cannon down the street anytime. And after 5:30, when Washington National went home, you could just, there was just nothing here. And the excitement that I got from, being back here was watching the council struggle with how to make this a better town. There was a vision for the nothing downtown, and I fortunately was a part, as you were, of seeing that vision realized. And now we're at a place where so much, in fact, all of it plus, has come to pass, and the success is extraordinary, that I'm thinking, I'd like to see us maintain the successes that we have, because there's a huge influx of restaurants and breweries and things like that. And those things are very hard to sustain. And I would like to see us do everything humanly possible to keep what we have and make better and help them thrive than creating all sorts of new things. The infrastructure issue is absolutely critical. But I'm anxious to see the results of our current labors having to do with what is the economic development that we have succeeded in the last 2 or 3 years. What has that brought to the city? What, in terms of finance, in terms of, raising the morale of the community, et cetera, because people come from all over to be here. It's not just us, the state. So I'm very interested in seeing if we can quantify that.
And what you have now is very different from what you had in terms of the downtown, the economy 30, 40 years ago.
Oh, absolutely.
And so it's an entirely different sort of a downtown. It doesn't have department stores. It doesn't have maybe auto dealerships and other sorts of things that were more traditional sources of revenue and activity. So you've created your own special, unique downtown. And what is it about it that you like? What is it about it that you'd like to see be better, be different? What do you want that isn't there now?
Live theater.
I think with the things like the performing arts or live theater are the very things that are going to help us sustain the restaurants and the hotels and other things that we're working to develop. Without some destinations, we have a lot of destinations, but I think keeping those fresh and new is important to keeping businesses busy. And when something doesn't work, I think we've done a pretty good job of sort of phasing it out, but it's a constant. We have to constantly watch what is working, what isn't, and when all of a sudden you need to have a new event like a Bike the Ridge or something, we do it, and it's successful, and it does change. It keeps people wanting to still make Evanston their destination, to live here, to work here, to just visit here.
I think so. What has always been cited by people, and I think most of us would agree, is that the variety of the types of stores that we have and the variety of restaurants, it's not what you find every place else replicated over and over again. So coming to Evanston has a very different feel. I mean, yes, we have a Gap, yes, we have a Taco Bell, but we also have a Hune, we have a distillery. That's right. We have all these places that are...
Breweries, small breweries, microbreweries.
I think that's the thing that really attracts people. That's not something they can find everywhere. And I think that's actually what's disappointing to people when they go to other places and you walk down a street in like Charleston, South Carolina, and you're like, oh, it's like Old Orchard. That's not what you had a vision of doing, So that's just citing something that I just experienced. But so I think that's what is we have this destination retail so often, in so many places, it's throughout the city. And I think maintaining that, making this still a business environment where people who have an idea of how to, a restaurant, a business, something different, they can start it here. And I think that's really important too.
And I think in terms of the maintaining, which I think I certainly support, but I think that we also have to think about looking at that throughout the city, not just in the downtown area. And we're doing that in some areas, but we need to do it all over the city so that we can't forget that.
And for me, the advantage of our downtown is its compactness. Everything's within just a few blocks. I'd like to see expansion of its connectivity to other parts of Evanston, and even within downtown to the lakefront, because everything is really so close in. It's not always walkable. So improving, enhancing walkability and connectivity among our business districts and within downtown would be.
This is a very, very specific issue. If we could make the Cine Arts, the Arts Theater, actually show, and I raised this with Wally, show arts movies like it once did back, when we first started. Because I hear from people over and over again, they drive to Highland Park to see the movies that are at Sundance, the movies that
no, Cine Arts still got some Sundance right now.
Doesn't have I haven't looked at movies, but I have heard this from a number of people, and when the business did change hands, they have a different policy. But when the movie theaters first opened, that was this real sense of we have adult entertainment, and the rhythm room is there, and so it's not that kind. I know.
We're not sweating tonight.
Right. I think pretty well. But you should have the debate on the council back then. Anne remembers this about having, having
that was just a minor debate.
Maybe we shouldn't call it art film. So.
And we have met with them. I mean, the Woody Allen movie opened last Friday. 17 screens nationwide. One of those 17 was in
Well, I was out of town, so I apologize. So that to me.
If they read reviews, probably not.
It was absolutely mobbed there this weekend. And the rhythm room was standing room.
Right, well, if we have that's why, that was, I'm sorry, I got a little bit behind the ball on this.
Well, it's still a problem because they won't show a movie that's not rated. Because if a foreign film does not pay for the rating, the Cinemark folks are on the board of the Motion Picture Association of America, and the corporate policies, they won't show it. But, they showed the first NC-17 movie in the entire chain's history in Evanston last year ago spring, largely because they kept hearing from us. So from an economic development perspective, Johanna and I, we're in regular touch with the chain. The guy who buys movies for the chain, his first job was at the theater where Rotary is now. So the guy who buys movies for Cinemark, his first job was he was ripping Rogers Park, and his first job was there. So, but we're going to have to put in it goes back to the downtown theater. I mean, we have to take control. I mean, we've got a vendor that does a good enough job in Cinemark, but people want more. They want different, and we're going to have to, as a city, pony up.
So
find partners to pony up.
Festival, which builds the support for art films. Traverse City, Michigan can do a wildly successful film festival, 3 or 4 day film festival. We compete with Chicago, but maybe there's potential there because we do a lot of homegrown films and as building arts and interest in a downtown venue.
Judy had a comment?
I just wanted to comment on the vision for downtown and the loss of retail in the downtown, I think has been fairly dramatic. We're very lucky to have the restaurants that we do. If you look at other communities, Highwood, for example, used to be the restaurant capital of the North Shore, no longer. I mean, the question about how sustainable that is an interesting one that will probably play out over 25 years or so. We have a downtown that is pretty much built up with storefronts, older storefronts, roughly 2,000 square feet or less, with rents that are fairly high. A few property owners control those, and sometimes they're difficult to deal with. But it does make our satellite shopping areas that much more important for retail, because people are looking to buy something and they're not finding it in the downtown. I mean, we're losing Tom Thumb now. That's maybe people don't like it, but there are people who come from God knows everywhere, and they've employed jillions of high school kids, and they're Evanston for I don't know how they managed to survive being so disorganized, but they're great people. It says Evanston about it. Well, you know, they're going. Some restaurants are coming in, but the replacement for a lot of these businesses are restaurants in the downtown. And I think if we're going to talk about visioning, we're going to have to talk about how we sustain the restaurants over the long term. And we're going to have to focus on our satellite shopping areas for what can they provide for people who might want to come in and dine in the downtown, but who definitely want to have a niche shopping experience and a unique shopping experience that you can't get at Old Orchard or some other shopping areas. And so if our vision for downtown is restaurants and theaters, I think that's a good one to have. But to expect that there's going to be retail come in, I don't think we can do that anymore without the cooperation of some of the real estate companies. Now, some of them have done a fairly good job of trying to fill these little tiny places that are too small for restaurants, or where the property owners don't want restaurants in. I think we need to open up that dialogue with the downtown property owners and really think about what's happening in the downtown, because as I heard all of you talking about, you know, the energy of downtown, all of you were talking about, you know, microbreweries and restaurants, and I didn't hear anybody mention retail at all. And that is a part of keeping your economic engine running, because it has to be balanced. And we talk about that all the time in the First Ward, because downtown, along with Peter and Don, I mean, downtown is a big part of the First Ward experience, and the connection to the lakefront. All of the seniors living at Mather, I mean, these are all people who are intensely focused on the downtown and who have a variety of opinions, most of which is, where do I shop? And so Dempster Street is really important to folks, really important. And now Chicago and Maine, I mean, hopefully that's going to have a little bit more energy now. Central Street, not so much, because it's funny when people start heading north, they think of that as sort of going to Wilmette or suburbia. It's very interesting, the comments that we get on that. But in terms of vision, I think it's something that the Economic Development Committee is really going to have to kind of keep in the back of their mind going, again, 5-10 years down the road, because it's not just where we're headed, it's where we are, really. I mean, I don't think it's going to turn back at all.
No, Judy, can I ask Judy something?
Yeah, go ahead. One of the interesting things the other night, and I've noticed this in other neighborhoods, but downtown, all these people are coming out of the theaters and out of restaurants, and they're going like this on the store doors, and they're all locked up. They all close down. And then, for example, over on Dempster, people are coming out of Union and some of the other restaurants around there, all the stores are closed. I mean, wouldn't it be interesting if we had a conversation with the shopkeepers that are there to maybe take a couple of nights and open them?
And you know what? Central Street does a good job with that, of responding to when there are actually consumers on the street. I think the problem for the downtown is that you don't have a collection of shops that are close by one another. I mean, if they could partner with a restaurant, for example, this is something downtown Evanston should be doing. I mean, generally downtown Evanston has been thinking more in terms of box stores and going to conventions, you know, for shopping center conventions and things like that. I think ignoring the fact that we do have a few niche stores downtown and how they might partner with the restaurants on their block would be helpful.
Yeah, Colleen, and then I'd like you to think about taking a stretch break, and you've been working hard, and also when we come back, think about what else is missing in the downtown and who else has responsibility for the downtown. Do you have chambers? Do you have business groups that you can partner with. So, Colleen.
Yeah, so we're talking about maintaining the businesses downtown. One of the things that we have, our economic development does a great job. We have our chamber that does a great job in economic development. We have the visitor center, the convention visitor center, to bring in people for that. But we don't talk a lot about attracting people to live here, like targeting that we have, that we're going on saying people move here. I mean, I think we're building the infrastructure to do that, but really saying we want to increase our population and we want more people living downtown. And are we out attracting people to come here? Our population has pretty much remained the same over the last 20 years for sure. You know, a little bit of a fluctuation. But do we want to increase our population, and how do we want to go about doing that? We talk a lot about, you know, keeping startups here and, you know, keeping graduates from, you know, the college age. And what you hear over and over again is you have to make the place cool to do that. That's, I know, a very technical term, but that's what folks say is you have to make it a place that, you know, younger people want to come, families want to come. How are we marketing that? How are we getting people to come and live in all the condos, all the apartments downtown? We do have affordable single family here compared to the city of Chicago. I mean, I have a lot of my colleagues are like, wow, we didn't realize that you can get a 3 or 4 bedroom house in Evanston for under $600,000. You can do that in, you know, neighborhoods here. Right house. I did not set her up. I did not. It was not a thing. But I don't think we have a concerted effort to really be outreaching to people in Chicago and people elsewhere to say, come live in Evanston. We have amazing things here. So.
The most exciting city in Illinois.
Exactly. I just don't think we market it. I mean, economic development markets businesses, but not residents.
I know we're getting ready to take a stretch, and I think Alderman Holmes touched on it earlier. And as much as I enjoy talking about the downtown, because that is part of my ward, there's also the west side of Evanston. And we didn't really have a chance to talk about our vision. And I don't think that's something that we do as a council, looking at the other side of town. And there's, I think, with the west side of Evanston, particularly down that Dempster-Dodge corridor, there are a lot of opportunities for us to have, more so probably than downtown. I think our staff and the aldermen that represent the downtown, we've done an excellent job filling spots. I mean, I think maybe 1 or 2 locations in the second ward that are actually vacant. And whereas if you look on the west side, I call them more opportunities, to be honest. And you know, with those opportunities, I think it sort of touches on some of the other things, because there's still a large number of young families that I see moving into the ward because of what Alderman Rainey shared, that they're wonderful houses that you can either get into and fix up that are still affordable, that are less than $400,000. And then with, you know, new businesses come opportunities for job creation that we all want to see, and also to generate new taxes. So without a doubt, looking at the plaza, which is an opportunity to create a lot of businesses, a lot of new jobs, I would like to kind of hear from council what your thoughts are.
Well, I think that's part of going back to our original statement in terms of the railroads. There really is that barrier, and that barrier has been there for 50 years, and it's only in the last, because I always like to give credit, only in the last few years, 5 years, say, that really this council has ever looked westward, put it like that. People just didn't pay any attention. But I think that this council has done that in the last 5 years. Look west and south, for that matter, because they didn't look at Howard Street either.
And then they collected west part of the 60th Ward.
So
station's gone.
yes, but you're right. It is a psychological barrier, and that's what I'm saying. So we have to begin to, you know.
But you've got a brand new Starbucks. You've made it.
Just with the supporting council and a hardworking staff, and I have to give credit to both business associations. There's an industrial West End, and then there's the West Village Business Association that's really focusing on retail and services in that area. I think over the next, 6 months, there's going to be a lot of activity, and it's going to involve taking some risks, some things that we probably wouldn't normally do. So, again,
My vision is that we all own it. Right? We all own it.
I hope so.
I hope you feel that we're all owning developments in Howard Street too. And
Can't do it without you.
Judy wants to make a comment, and then let's take a break, and when we come back, let's talk about the west side, and let's talk about the owning it and the visions beyond one's ward, and you are doing a really good job of that, is looking out there and saying, this is our community in its entirety. How can we make all parts of it better? How can we own all parts of it, take credit for all parts of it, and solve problems in all parts of it? So, Judy, and let's take a break.
I just want to make 3 points. First, on Fountain Square, I think Fountain Square, the redesign of Fountain Square gives us an opportunity to create an incredible public space. And even if we, I'm thinking William Howard Taft or someone came to Evanston at one time. There's a historic photograph of people gathered in Fountain Square listening to him. It wasn't Teddy Roosevelt, that was on the Northwestern campus, but listening to him speak. And the sense of community in that space, I think, was something that has always impressed me. But having a central public space, I think, is really going to be helpful. Second thing about Howard Street, when I was a little kid, went to Howard Street to get my shoes for my 8th grade graduation. Howard Street has always been the defining street that says you're coming into Evanston. It's always been, and I remember having this experience coming into Evanston going, and that's really important. And Alderman Rainey, I think that's why others may not have had that memory, but that's why Howard Street is really important, is because it sets the tone for what we as a community expect in our community. The quality, that you are in a different place, that what happens on the one side of the street does not necessarily going to be happening on the other side of the street. And then the last thing I want to mention is about Dempster and Dodge. And I've always been really interested in that property, and I know that it has remediation issues because of whatever was there before. I don't remember what industrial.
It was a plating. It was a plating company.
But I've always wondered why we don't do a mixed. I've always wondered why we don't do a mixed-use residential, commercial something. Because it just, to me, it cries out for residential and commercial.
Market. You need someone to come and invest. So it's not a we. I mean, it's a matter of...
It's a we. It's part of our vision. It's part of our, what do we want to see at Dempster and Dodge? Because I don't know. I'm just asking the question.
But it's like people who said for years, like Rose Cat, about Asbury and Oakton, well, why don't you think about bringing a Trader Joe here?
It's part of the vision thing.
The developer issues at Dempster Dodge, I think, have been so difficult. Right. And everything you get there is a blessing almost.
Okay, so what do we need to do in the visioning to make that better, to make that more attractive?
Just from the comments that you made earlier, I tried to kind of summarize the underlying elements for your work on what your vision of what Evanston could be. And you have a unique quality of life here that you'd like to maintain and enhance. You want to create and own your own vision. And infrastructure. Your infrastructure is an essential component of your future. You cannot have the future you want without this being in place and in good shape. It gives you options for other things. Now, before we left, we started to talk about the west side and vision, and with a half an hour left, I want you to think about how concise you can be on that. This does not have to be the only time that the council talks about its vision. You need to start somewhere, and you have. And I can't emphasize enough how hard this work is, because it is not what you're used to. It's not what you usually do. And having this kind of conversation with each other is really hard work, and it's really valuable work. And hopefully some members of the community are watching this tonight and thinking, these are really good questions, and they are talking about really important issues that are going to matter to me and my family and my friends in the future. And the other thing is, if you don't do it, who will? And are you willing to let somebody else shape this community's future? You're its elected officials, it's representative democracy. There are places in the United States right now where councils are being challenged about whether or not their vision is the right vision. I was just down in Sarasota, Florida, and there is a community group that has actually hired its own community development consultants and is working on putting a plan together for that community's waterfront. And they took it to the council and they said, this is what we're doing, and do you want to play? That's good. I mean, so you've talked about owning your vision, and this is how you start owning your vision. This is how you define it, you talk about it, you share it with each other, you find your common ground, you define it, you deconstruct it, you put it back together again, and you get ready to find ways to create the opportunity to move in those kinds of directions. And you lead the community, you have the leadership role to create this vision. So let's talk a little bit about outside of the downtown. Let's whet our discussion about that, and then you need to talk a little bit about what you want to do next with these kinds of topics. So Peter, you introduced it right before our break, and why don't you talk a little bit about what it means for you?
Well, what it means for me is what it means for Evanston. And I think if you were to kind of just look at the stores on a piece of paper without assigning it to Evanston, you have the main corridor that leads into Evanston. And the couple of businesses that we have is a nice little blend of services and retail. So we have a newly created, fairly funded clinic that there and staff work very hard on. We have a Team Evanston, so we have a soccer training facility. We have a swim school that's looking to come into. We have a brand new brewery. The other businesses that are coming in, there's a restaurant supply company, and then there's also an antique business. Yeah, well, that's a very nice, newly renovated restaurant as soon as you come in. Yep, you also have the bakers that are there. And then you have a national chain. So you have a McDonald's, you'll soon have a Starbucks, you have a Dunkin' Donuts on the other side. McDonald's, $2.3 million a year. The Burger King, I don't know how much they do. The Subway, based on their model, they should do right about over $1 million. The Dunkin' Donuts should do $1.8 million. So there's a lot of tax dollars that are being, or retail, that are being generated in that one corridor. And I think, and Panino's.
Excuse me.
You're just talking about the street.
Yeah, I'm just talking in general, and the services that are there. So.
Heartland, don't forget that.
Oh, and then I was just moving down. So, of course, and then at the kind of epicenter, you have Hardwood that's doing a tremendous job attracting in people from the dance center. So there are all these elements that are just sort of in that location, and I think. One of the things that we're challenged with over there, and our business associations do a real good job creating an atmosphere where there's a lot of communication and camaraderie, but we haven't really found a way to market that area that's more, that to just, that includes just the diversity of businesses and services that are there. And I think when I look out, 4 or 5 years, I can see the places filled. I can see the increased foot traffic. But it's just how do you market? Like definitely when you say downtown Evanston, there are things that come to mind. And I want to build that same type of perception and vision for West Evanston. So when you say the Dempster corridor, do you see it as the main entryway into Evanston? What things come to mind? And I think that's going to be the challenge over the next couple of years of kind of weaving together all those different services and retails into a nice image, a better image, because it's.
And I think some of it is that perception isn't there because these are readaptive uses of buildings that were designed for something else.
Industrial purposes.
And sort of the visitor's side of the light industrial that faces it. And so at some point, Erie has its signage, the soccer facility has a little sign. But I think some of it is creating a brand over there. And some of that's going to take some difference in terms of the facade or a uniform signage in a way so that people, as they're driving in, they're like, oh yes, Erie, there's the soccer, there's the swimming.
Cool.
We get
That's
that.
coming in,
Because Chicken and Waffles is right there, so that's the stamp. But now these other buildings have been repurposed, so we have to get people to look not at what the building once was used for, because that's conveyed in the style of the architecture, but what it's now being used for.
If you look at the list of businesses on the side, I mean, it's a pretty impressive list. It's just that they're located somewhat dispersely, and it's not the presence of the businesses. I mean, that's all great. It is an impressive list, and if you put it in a 3-block stretch anywhere else, it would be a really vibrant district. The issue is that what we see still are the vacancies, and it's the vacancies that make us think that it's not a vibrant place when you put all those existing businesses and acknowledge that they're there and realize there is a lot going on the west side. I think walkability is an issue. I think that wider sidewalks, walkability, safer crossings will make so much of that more of a destination.
And I think infrastructure space too. Obviously, you have to get the stores and the people coming, and then.
And also we have to remember that when we talk about West Side, we're talking about different parts of the West Side. You're talking about the Dempster corridor, I'm talking about Church Emerson corridor. That coming into it, which makes it really different, and which is South of Lake more acceptable, and I'm just being honest, more acceptable, and where things have happened in the last 25, 30 years versus north of Lake rather, which always puzzles me because we have this fantastic top high school.
A captive audience.
Right here in the middle. And we've not ever done anything around it. And that is, it's just absolutely amazing. And I think that we have to engage the high school more in terms of what we're trying to do as a city, because I think it's a responsibility.
Because they're an economic resource sitting there, with the students who come, the parents who drop them off, the parents who come to the school, and all of the employees within the school.
All the people who come for the sports events.
But I mean, the entryway into downtown, in Church, we have some of Dempster, but that's farther south.
And Emerson is more residential, but we still get to that corner where there is that enormous high school. And it has always puzzled me about why Starbucks didn't put itself right there on that corner. Because there are all those kids who are juniors, seniors, all those people who want to get a decent cup of coffee.
Well, I would like to say we had that goofy protest that we did when the business didn't go in at Dempster Dodge. Somebody pulled out.
They were
over there with picket signs, and I read some.
Was it AJ? No, it wasn't AJ Wright. It was that funky new type of store.
I don't know what it was, but I and to read something as mayor. So I'm reading this thing. And Peter, it was really interesting to me anyway, because it had the number of cars that go past that. It was an incredible number. So I think that one of the things we need to do is all of us use the numbers, whatever they are, for Church Street, Delores as well. But the number of car trips past, because that's something that a business, yes, I agree with walkability, but knowing how many car trips and the diversity of the people who are driving with us, they're from all over, because they go to see all those sporting events.
And the number of people who are stopping, they're not just driving through, they're actually stopping and getting out of their car for a period of time. So they're just looking for a place to eat, something to do.
What I'm hoping is, and because we don't want to take all the time with this, is that maybe we could use one of our 3rd or 5th Mondays in the fall to review the West Side plan, because we really do have a West Side plan that this council approved, and we need to look at it, maybe update it, do whatever, and to think about that in terms of where we want to do that. I think that if we could do that on the Mondays, we would have time to do that.
But I think we have a goal of all being on the same page so that we all market it the same way.
I think part of the problem is that, there's such a draw on each side of the Dempster Dodge area, Dodge shopping area especially. It's a huge attraction at Maine and with the big box stores and everything. And then there's all this development in Chicago. So I think there is a sort of burning there that, people are starting to go to those locations. And so I think it's going to take some kind of unique businesses and opportunities there, truly, destinations like, the swimming pool or the, bowling alley. But I think it's going to have to be something that the other areas aren't offering to really attract people to get out and shop or spend time there.
And the advantage that Dempster Dodge has is space.
Yes.
That space and parking that does not exist in the other denser parts of the
Absolutely.
Judy?
I've always wondered, was it a Bed Bath & Beyond? What was over there that closed? There was something.
There was a Farmore there.
There was something where I thought, gosh, that would be a perfect destination for Northwestern students who are coming and need stuff for their rooms or need stuff for their apartments. I mean, that's 8,000 undergraduates, another however many graduate students. I mean, we have a lot of rental space for them, and they need somewhere to shop.
HOMEGOOD.
Yeah, we tried to.
We wanted a HOMEGOOD.
But it was another type of store that was part of that. It sort of.
No, it was on the same side as Dance Center Evans.
No, I remember.
They renovated the entire store, and then they put it was coming, and then it went bankrupt.
Right.
Before it got.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I know.
One of the challenges that that center has,
Something like that.
one of the challenges, I think we'll have to share the whole. Yeah, one of the challenges the center has, though, is the radius.
Right.
That when national retailers are looking to locate, they look at metrics that deal with the radius of 2 miles, 3 miles, 5 miles out, and 2.5, 3 miles, you start getting fish. And that's a challenge. Where other places where they make other spending decisions, if they draw that circle, there are people in that whole circle.
But you look at TJ Maxx, for example. I mean, there are tons of people in TJ Maxx.
Well, look at Marshalls.
Right. I mean,
look at Best Buy. Look at all these places.
Yeah, I
it's
think
the same radius.
Yeah. Look at Trader Joe's. I mean, their circle is even more in the water. I mean, so it's a recognition that they're drawing their radius incorrectly.
And the challenge is that those cases have to be made with people who've never set foot in Evanston.
That's right.
And that's the biggest challenge. If we can bring everyone to Evanston to see all the things you talked about, we'd be great.
They'd be excited. So that, Delores, that was an excellent idea about bringing back the plan that you have in place and taking a look at it. And the next 2 to 5 years, part of your strategy can be the owning. That this is Evanston's, this is an issue for all of Evanston, and we want to make it better. So what does better look like? What does better mean to each of you? And collectively, what does it mean, and what does it mean in the community? Gesundheit, and how ultimately, you're going to have to share your thoughts with the community and what they think they want, and what retailers think will work for them, and what how it can be coordinated. I think Dempster corridor is not a very marketable phrase. Dempster Dodge, there may be some things that you can, but the other thing that you have is that sense of history. What was there before? What do people remember? And do they remember it in a good way? Do they remember it as something that they didn't want to spend time with? So how you position it is going to be important, and that's a really good vision strategy for the next 2 to 10 years. Is how can that rise? How can that feel like a wonderful asset for Evanston and for the immediate residents, and what is about it that could be a destination? What could be really fun about it?
I guess before we close, I want to thank council, because I think we've actually started that process, and for those of you that supported the TIF a few years ago, that's really where it begins. And I think just in my short time on council, I've learned a lot, particularly from watching Alderman Rainey as a resident when we started to talk about the TIF, and now actually a few years older and sitting on council and watching that TIF make some huge transformations, some buildings in Howard is really exciting. So when I look back at the past, it sort of gives me a vision for the future, and 5-10 years from now, whether it's an alderman or a resident, being able to know that there are resources that will be there to leverage public tax dollars, similar to what Alderman Rand did on Howard Street, is exciting.
I'd like to reach out to Evanston businesses who may either be outgrowing or find their space sort of in central Evanston outmoded, and get them to stay in Evanston. I mean, I'm kind of thinking now, why is Tom Thumb going to Niles? Yeah. I mean, why aren't they going to Dempster and Dodge? And have we talked with them? There's other, the destination retail I can think of in Evanston, Folk Fabrics, Tom Thumb, Spice House. These are places where people come from miles around because they're so unique and draw people in. And so what are we doing to create a conversation with these businesses to either expand or find out what their space needs are and keep them in town?
And we've had long-standing conversations with
there have been many.
Well, that's good. But let's talk to Tom Thumb.
But isn't it also the case that this developer is very difficult to deal with in terms of new leases, et cetera?
Where? No.
The prior developer was. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Creed owned it.
Right.
There were some difficulties, and I think the big issue at the time was Safeway and their parking. But now,
Bonnie is not difficult to deal with?
not at all. I think they've been very, very open to any ideas.
I did talk with Tom Thumb. He told me they weren't leaving.
They what?
They told me they weren't leaving. This was
They like
a while.
That may have been between
But don't we have two
the
businesses that are going into that?
May have been.
No, I don't think they were lying. I think that
Oh, no, I'm sure they were lying.
But don't you have two businesses that are going in there?
We have restaurants.
That's the street.
Been in touch. Johanna, what?
Sure. So we've had conversations with Tom Thumb and the owner over the years. Originally, his idea was, I think, what we told for a long time was the hobby industry is declining. It's moving to an online model, and that was the story that we were being told. And then more recently, this Niles opportunity popped up that we didn't know about, and I know we've reached out to see if there's still an ability to retain. And I think it's probably, for a lot of businesses, it's a very emotional decision to move and change and leave the community you've been in for a long time. So we think that's done, but that came in very late in the game. We'd always heard that it was an online situation, that was the best way to reach customers. Parking downtown was difficult. If this corridor is a challenging place to park, if you're coming from a place you're not familiar with. So that was, we've been in touch.
So Hobby Lobby?
We don't want them to be.
No, I'm telling you, they just opened a new store in Chopper. I'm serious. So Hobby Lobby. Hobby Lobby.
We don't want Hobby Lobby.
But I think in terms of vision, I think the vision would be that we stay in contact with everyone in Evanston so we don't lose anyone. That we have, especially at Dempster Dodge, where we have an opportunity that should work for everyone. I mean, it's the most central location, actually, outside the downtown. It should work for everybody.
And we already have Evanston Dance Center, which has 800 students.
Right.
So so many of those students are young enough that parents don't leave. I mean, they stay waiting for them. And, so, or the lesson isn't long enough for you to go back home. So you stay. And
but what you need over there, there are things that will attract those parents while they're there.
Right.
And so there's only a few more, if I'm not mistaken, there's not that many more vacancies now because that big, where they're, because people just, buffet space was.
Trying to be
that, that space is on, which is a large space.
Right. The west space is, the west side, right the cheap store on the west side.
Where the bookstore was, right. I think that's where the bookstore was, and then one down by Panino's.
And then the whole grocery store.
Well, the grocery store is coming though, right?
Well,
We hope.
we hope.
We'll talk about that later.
I love the west side as a vision. 2, 5, 10 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's worthy.
Something like Little Beans, because there was a discovery zone there years ago. No, I'm just saying, not and I'll come after you. Something that's similar in terms of the profile of
There used to be
a discovery zone.
The discovery zone, absolutely. Everything that was anything was there.
Yeah, and there was Kids R Us, Toys R Us, the discovery zone, and so it was.
Frank's.
Right. So it was definitely. I mean, but so you have all these kids coming to dance. What else do they want? A dance store of some sort. But
Colleen.
Yes. Not to take it away from economic development, when we're talking about this visioning process and the things that we want to do and we talk about the council, one thing that I think we tend to do on council is we're in many ways are insular of what the city's doing and what the council's doing. And as we're looking at the bigger vision more comprehensively, of finding ways to get our not-for-profits, our school districts, the university, the hospitals, to partner with us on these visions, to get their buy-in for what is important to us, so that we're all working together. And not saying that we don't do that a little bit, but really making that an important goal for us is that we are working as a community. It's never going to be seamless, but there's a lot of good work going on here that we're not tapping into. And we've talked about that around social services and looking at for mental health and CDBG, working with the not-for-profits. But on other pieces that we're doing, I think we do it the best with economic development, but we can do it in other areas of the community. Who are our key partners and what do we want to do versus just looking at just our money here? How can we leverage it? How can we leverage our relationships? So just to keep that in mind as we move forward on envisioning and
I think a good model also is, and I said it earlier, but I think that what we're doing with our youth and young adult division, working with all the other partners in the community, is an excellent model in terms of where we want to go, how it can be done. And, I think that's really, something that we have to think about in terms of the other departments of the city, how that can be, pulled together. But they've reached out really to every possible partner. And I think you're right.
Melissa, the more I learn about career and career to career, that's except they don't never have programs or anything. It really is just to pull everybody together to leverage whatever they're doing to make things better so that we can have a good product at the end of, when people graduate from high school. That will be where we want to go with that.
Well, I think you're right, Colleen. I just believe that I hadn't gotten the message across with the community foundation is having its benefit in Wilmette in some club. I thought, oh my, I felt like I failed in terms of explaining the tax base.
And they don't think anything of it. They don't think anything. I had a lunch with the board chair. That's who I was with when we saw it. They think nothing of it. They think, it's bringing money into Evanston. But the symbolism of the one organization that's solely founded to focus on Evanston is going to Wilmette for their fundraiser. Because, we can't find a big enough room, and that Levy Center was so hard to deal with last year, so we're going to go and go to Wilmette. And I told Joe Guzman, the board chair today, perception is reality. We all deal with perception every single day, and what that says is that's another Evanston. The Community Foundation is focused on another Evanston, not the Evanston certainly that I'm familiar with and I think you're familiar with. And what do? And they just shrug their shoulders saying, if someone would build a bigger venue for our event, then we would.
The Arlington or the hotel?
It's not big enough.
It's not so big, it's in Wilmette.
The Arlington?
The country call, the Michigan Shore.
But if I was to shift the conversation, open it up to ECF, YJC, they attract people before so they have to go out of town. So it's unfortunate. I don't want to just think
They say it's too expensive.
And they say,
that's one of the things that we have to work on. I've been trying to work on making the sororities and the fraternities and some of the social clubs bring their events back to Evanston, but they can't afford it. They need like Warrington. And so if they would match the prices, that we could really begin to bring people back, but it's too expensive. They can't do it.
You could offer the Levy Center for a really reduced fee on free.
Well, no, it's cheaper. It is cheaper than the other places. But they say
it's hard to deal with.
I can understand that. Well, it's not the professional hosting
really
atmosphere.
For a discount.
That's a very important part of the conversation because you can't do it all yourselves. You don't have unlimited resources, time, energy, staffing. And these other entities, that partnership that Colleen just described, finding new ways to engage these folks and help them understand that in order for Evanston to be what you all want it to be, you all have to find ways to make it work together. And you all have to be responsible. The city can't just be the adult in the room and everybody else throwing tantrums. That you need other adults to work with you, and not that they do, but so I know sometimes it feels that way.
We throw tantrums too.
Well, and you're entitled.
But it comes back to the idea that what's our shared vision?
Yes.
All of these, we can't be the only one who has the vision for Evanston, but these other. I understand there might be some issues with space or something, but the whole point is. You're about Evanston, so what are ways that you can make it work because you want it to be about Evanston?
Yeah. What about the university?
Parties on our parking garage.
Yes.
Was the university space big enough for an event?
No, I wish. No.
It's they pitch a tent.
They pitch a tent, right. The Henry Crown Sports Field is the biggest. It's really not a good space, unfortunately.
They have the arts and crafts thing every year.
And from Crown Sports Field, but
it's not pretty.
It's a gym.
So is the League Center. Right, and that's right. that's maybe not the venue that people want. I mean, the hotel or a banquet hall is really what people want to do. They want, yeah, absolutely. And we don't have a banquet hall, but we do have hotels. The Hilton Garden is reasonable enough, but it's not large enough. It can only hold maybe 200. Don't do that. It's looking at 300 or 400 people.
A couple more comments, and then I think you'll want to go home and get some rest. Judy?
Thank you again.
Judy, wait. We'll do just a bit of closure. Judy had a comment, and then...
I just wanted to say that the shared partnerships are really important, and I absolutely agree with that. But we can't lose sight of the buy-in that we have to have from our residents, and because we don't want it to appear that we're dealing and with in a closed bubble. They want to know that we're looking out for what's best for them. And there are issues with every large organization in town in terms of residents, and that communication from us as the elected officials so that we communicate that we are looking out, again, for their best interests and their future is, I think, really important. So partnerships, yep, but gotta stay in touch with our constituents on that.
We can do it all. I think so. We can do it all. We can.
So what do y'all want to do next?
Go home.
Has this been useful?
Yes.
I mean,
Very good.
So should we do this on some sort of, incremental basis? Is this a semi-annual kind of discussion? Do you feel that there are issues that you didn't get to tonight that you want to talk about sooner than later again?
I think we should do it with some regularity so that we develop a continuing conversation among ourselves of topics that...
Because we don't have a chance to talk ever.
No. I think that's important to do. Quarterly or semi-annually? Twice a year?
Twice a year.
I think yearly is too long a time.
In your experience as a council, I think you've talked about this already. We've talked about this in the past, just being able to go away and have a retreat where we just sort of talk about a variety of issues, sort of offline. And how do other councils do that? That's what this is.
Yeah. I think
as close as we can get.
This is as close as you can get. All cities are regulated and prevented from discussing anything other than legal matters, property acquisition, personnel issues for the most part in closed sessions. And so, but you've had candid conversation here tonight.
I think this has been pretty frank and open.
Yeah. I mean, it has, and there's nothing I heard that couldn't be said, and it's powerful. It's powerful stuff to talk about concepts for how your future might be shaped by you. And it's important that you have this conversation first, and you have it in a public venue. The press is here, they're going to say something, it's being recorded, and so if people are interested, they can see it. And I don't know if they'll comment on it or not, but you're not hiding anything. You are trying to shape Evanston's visionary future, and you don't know what's coming at you. Nobody does, but looking at the options, the alternatives, the capacity is a powerful thing, and I think people in Evanston will be proud that you chose to do this kind of work, because it means you're looking out for their best interests now and in the future. You're trying to craft things now that are going to be important for the future. You're not always going to be here. You're not always going to be in this role. And this is legacy building in the best, most powerful way is without slapping your name on buildings and things like that. You are building foundations for this community. They're very powerful. And what people did 100 years ago, you are laying the foundation for what happens 100 years now forward.
Is the setup, we've done this room a little bit differently, is this setup more comfortable?
Yeah, we can all look each other in the eye and have questions.
Nice to meet you. And we have two referrals. We have the rules referral to discuss our meeting format, and I think we have an opportunity to discuss the West End plan. So those are two valuable things that we're walking out with.
I would like to thank Jean and the chocolate.
Yes. I also have, these, again, this is not a homework assignment. You don't have to go out and ask these questions, but these are questions that just are food for thought. Some things that are happening a little elsewhere, some things about your social services safety net, if people have plans and resources, they can do things. But what about the people in this community that don't have plans and resources? How do they fit in, and how can they be supported as part of your vision? There are lots of elements to vision planning, and these are simply questions. You will have better, more powerful, more interesting, and more pointed questions than I've come up with, because you know your community better than I do. And I just ask you to think about it as a starting point. If you find it interesting, fine. And if you don't, throw it away.
Recycle.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure, as always. Thank you.